Hello and welcome to the Fellowship Phase, an Adventures of Middle-earth podcast. I'm Josh, and that's Callum, and that is Brendan. We're going to give you inside information on how to find your own path through Tolkien's world.
The shadow fell on Mirkwood long ago. Greenwood the Great it was once. Mirkwood it is called now. But this is not Sauron's wood. Not yet. His power reaches ever deeper into the forest as he tries to master the trees themselves. In time, the forest may come to serve him as a land of Mordor serves him. Until then, this is a dark, wild region, unfriendly to all, orcs, men, and elves alike. Hidden in the glades and dells, there are surprises, both light and dark.
Hello everyone, how you doing?
Good, happy to be here again. One of these days I'm going to learn not to say hello during your intro.
Hello.
One of these days I'm going to learn why Lake Town's called Lake Town, but it will not be this day.
Not be this day.
Thank you for that introduction, Callum. We are talking today about Mirkwood, and specifically if we're going to run a campaign or a session in Mirkwood, what do we need to know? So Brendan, over to you. You're a lore master who's going to run a session in Mirkwood. Perhaps the players have surprised you and taken a left turn and you're left with some last minute prep. What do we need to think about if we are going to be lore mastering in Mirkwood and we've not got much time to prepare?
Also, why is it called Mirkwood?
I wasn't totally paying attention during the introduction, so I'm still not sure in that. So I'm going to be taking on the role of the lore master who is doing this last minute prep. So I suppose maybe that's the first important question. What is Mirkwood, and what might my expectations might my players have if they're coming into Mirkwood?
Strong question to kick off. So I suppose cuts two ways. One, if they're Tolkien fans, which most people who play AIM, I think we know are, you've got the advantage that Tolkien fans know a huge amount about Mirkwood. It's obviously a big centerpiece to The Hobbit. It does feature in Lord of the Rings and the lore itself as this great swathe of evil forest. Dark things happen. There are a number of established factions and monsters and routes and reasons to cross. So there are plenty of plot hooks to deal with. And hopefully most of you players will already have a sense of it being this wild, evil place. But there's always the chance that a player in your game is not a Tolkien nerd. And actually Adventures in Middle-earth is their first introduction to this world, in which case probably the most important sense is that it is a daunting and perilous place, which no one has ever really kind of mastered. It's like classic Tolkien wilderness. Like, it is a wild place.
Yeah, and it's huge. My understanding is that it's around about 600 miles from the bottom of it to the top of it.
Yeah, it's like catastrophically large.
I remember size as the island of Great Britain.
when you put it like that, that's absolutely wild. I remember reading, my first introduction to it was The Hobbit, but not just the Hobbit story, but actually the map in the Hobbit. Because you open it up, and actually it doesn't include the Shire. You just get the first bit is really when they get to Rivendell. Then you've got the Misty Mountains, the wonderful little triangles, and then basically the entire map is trees, because Mirkwood makes such a huge chunk of the map, and then the Misty Mountains off on the right hand side. So yeah, it was literally one of my first introductions to Tolkien was opening my copy of The Hobbit to the map, and Mirkwood just being like this huge thing with spider webs etched into it.
It's a really lovely map. Yeah, and I think to me, Mirkwood is kind of representative maybe of that sort of the history of Britain we know that in most of, temperate regions, that forests were much wider spread than they are now. Like human development over time has led to massive deforestation and, move towards fields and crops and livestock. And Mirkwood and the other forests, like the Old Forest and Fangorn, are sort of representative of these remnant ancient forests that persist. And in the sort of mythology that Tolkien builds, they are places that are like harbor things that are used to be widespread and have been around for a long time and have become sort of mythological folk tales. So the Ents, the Huorns, Tom Bombadil and Old Man Willow, these sort of, the Green Man stories, it's a big part of Celtic and British mythology was, to do with the forest, druids, the sort of magical side of things. And that really, I think, is the feel that Mirkwood gives to me, but it's been corrupted. And it's been like, historically, in the lore, Mirkwood the Great, Greenwood the Great was the name before it became corrupted and darkened, and it's wider and connected to Fangorn. I think Treebeard sort of talks about that in terms of like maybe the Entwives. People theorized that their gardens were just the south of Mirkwood, although it's not sort of set. And I guess before evil came to the forest, it was a much brighter place. There was a lot of elves living there. I think one of the most famous locations in Mirkwood is the fortress of Dol Guldur that we see in the Hobbit films, where the sort of White Council go and take it back. And that was an elven place before it was evil. The fortress it was called Amon Lac, the Bald Hill, and it was the capital of Orifer, who was the sort of ruler of Mirkwood, who I think died at the Battle of the Last Alliance, along with a lot of elves from
I think it was Daggerland that the kind of Orifer and the Wood Elves charged. So the Dead Marshes, which are Daggerland, are populated by the Wood Elves who foolishly charged the forces of Moria. Mordor.
So it was a good place, and I think that to me that comes so many ideas about like there's ruins, there's old things, there's creatures, there's nameless creatures potentially, and the map that is laid out. We'll get into some specific locations, but if Brendan, you're prepping an adventure in Mirkwood, I would say the first place to start is actually just read the lore around it. You don't have to do that, but I think that really gives inspiration about, once you know that, you're like, well, there'll be elven ruins, there'll be, there'll potentially be signs of things that once were, old trees that are potentially sacred, etching, marking, or like take some examples. Like I've got a book of like Celtic myths, and some examples from that, or like druidic, that's I guess our Radagast figure.
So, something I think thinking where to start, the way The Hobbit is so successful as a book is obviously it starts you as the reader in sort of the Shire, which is our gateway in, because it's kind of like our world. Everything's very familiar, slightly different, but pretty familiar to what life, particularly when Tolkien was writing, was like. And then as the hobbits leave the safety of the Shire, they see this more fantastical world and help the reader understand the fantastical world. And the thing the hobbits find is that Mirkwood is not like the woods they know. It's not like the kind of like tamed orchards and playful forests of the Shire. It's this daunting place. And I think that's it's a forest, but not as the players know it. And I think the thing that always stuck with me as a kid reading The Hobbit was when Bjorn talks about how they mustn't leave the path, because basically they would never find the path again. And I remember as a kid reading it, and I was like, how could there be a forest that was big enough that you could genuinely get lost and that would just be it? You would never find your way back to the path again. But Tolkien repeats that quite a few times, and it's what ends up happening to the dwarves, is that they stumble off the path and they become hopelessly lost. And I think that's a good way of trying to get your head around it for players is that they are massively vulnerable, and that if they stray even slightly off course, the chances are that they may never find their way back to where they want to be.
Yeah. So it's got this sense of it as kind of this brooding primeval forest, almost as you were talking about it as being kind of an ancient thing, but almost like representing the danger of the woodland, in the same way that the old forest or Fangorn is about the kind of the power and the strength of woodland. This is really a much more hostile place.
Yeah, it's you kind of anthropomorphizing the trees, and no wonder they're annoyed. And there's this whole section of the forest. Is like if you look at the map, there's a sort of bit at the bottom right which is sort of chunk out, the East Bight, the area is called, and the myth goes that men of the kingdom of Ravanian to the east of it long ago sort of cut down such a big part of the forest. These, no wonder the trees are annoyed. They hate axes and that sort of these. I love trees. I love looking at them. I love how unique they are, particularly the ones that are like wizened and twisted and unusual and unique. And I think that's a really evocative thing for storytelling. And if there's magic, it's like, well, of all the magic, trees, like the life and energy there, like if they could come to life and have feelings and express those feelings, that ominous. And I guess that's what that introduction was a little bit, is that I guess there's the elves and there's the men and there's people that are good, and then there's the evil creatures of Sauron, and then there's almost like the third thing, which is the forest itself, and like that harbors ill will towards all things.
It's a big forest. If I'm coming into it as a lore master, are there areas or regions that I need to know about in it?
Yeah, I really like the way they set that in the book. So there's the lore master's map, which it sort of divides areas up into like how difficult they are, and gives you like regions, and then within each region of the forest, it sort of lays out some. I really like the way they do this actually. So say for example we take in the Ravanian region guide, they have regions of Mirkwood. So the book lays out like a basic introduction to Mirkwood overall, and gives you some examples of some themes about Mirkwood. And I think we see this in the film, and they talk about it in the book. There's no light, so it's quite hard to see. Your vision can be played tricks on, things are different and strange. There's no fresh air, so it's sort of like lifeless, breathless, it's hard to breathe. And occasionally, and I've definitely employed this, you might say like there's like a stench might come up from bog, or a rustling of leaves might suggest something is watching you. There's no water, so there's few streams, it's difficult to drink. There's no food, so it's hard to forage. There are no paths, it's hard to find your way. There's little life, and the life that is there that might be quite strange. There's no hope. All these sort of things. And they give you some examples about like what the evils of the forest. But say like we talk about the different regions. So the north of the forest is the least corrupted. And in the book, it lays out for each area, it gives you like the sort of scenery and terrain. So like what type of trees there'll be, what the ground is underneath. Like we're talking about terrain before. So North Mirkwood's got like cliffs. There might be fog, there might be hedges, roaring water, roots. There's some signs of like ancient ruins potentially due to the Eothed, because they were up that area. There might be like areas that the elves congregate and sing and dance. So there might be quite like nice things that you can run into.
Yeah.
And it lays out like wildlife, so like wolves, bears, deers, rabbits, foxes, and you can work them into journey events. And then it gives you a bit of an idea about inhabitants. So it's quite a nice place to start. And really, although it's all quite similar, it's all big forest, the way that the regions are divided, and also like at a glance, you can see like this is more dangerous in that area. it does give you quite a lot of inspiration to try and different. I don't know how you felt that as players, like when you're in Mirkwood. Has it felt different for the different areas? Hopefully it's felt scary, because that's been what I've been going.
Yeah, it definitely has felt scary. It felt absolutely awful. The decision to cross Mirkwood has always been like an unpleasant one, which I think is what it should be. It should feel like this daunting thing, and it has felt like that. And as part of that's that kind of meta knowledge that as players we know it's grim and awful. But you've done a good job of kind of signposting for us, like, oh well, if we take the elf path, which is further north, what might we expect? And some NPCs have given us some indication of what that's like. Or one of the missions we took was actually to cross the old forest road, which goes basically through the very middle. It's further south than the elf path, and there was a different flavor of forest there, what we might encounter, what the challenges might be, and they were different. And very recently we'd actually done an adventure near Dogoldur in the kind of the southern reaches of the forest, and again, the way you described it, it felt more ominous and more oppressive.
Josh, so I'm if I'm kind of lore mastering this kind of thing for the first time, because I think that's one of the things that I would be wondering about, worrying about. How do you make a big, expansive forest feel like it's got different bits to it? So how did Callum kind of put that across when you were playing?
I think it was the things that you... This is probably true of basically describing any room or scene when you're running a game, is which bits you choose to pick out. Like, if the characters walk into a room, as dungeon masters, we know we don't tell them literally every single thing that's in the room. You pick the important bits. And I think what Callum successfully did was just highlight a couple of things and then stuck with the theme. So certain areas, and I've mentioned this in the podcast before, I hate spiders, and Mirkwood is full of spiders.
Josh, I've never come across that.
So I gave you a magic sword particularly good at killing spiders.
Yeah, that was literally a double-edged sword, because it meant I was the one that ended up killing all the spiders. Some areas were more infested with spiders, and you did a good job of really laying on how much web there was, that we'd every so often come across these sacks which were strung up food. Other places the trees were thinner, or it was a different type of tree, and also you did a good job of talking about the light. So that I think the sense is that the light doesn't really penetrate the canopy at all, but then in some places I think you kind of let it a bit and they felt less evil, like there was bits of sunlight coming through and it felt like this was maybe a less dangerous area. So I think just picking one or two particular plants or species or trees or a particular animal and kind of keeping that repetition describing a particular area helps the players think of it as a different zone almost of the forest.
Okay.
I guess like what we just talked about terrain, I think that can be really helpful as well. Like if you think about the sort of topography of the terrain and what's around it. So a recent adventure, like I kept mentioning stuff about it being boggy and wet.
Yeah.
And like I think if you keep repeating yourself, because like, as a player, I find that there's so much going on and it's hard to focus all the time. And even if you're making notes, you might not pick up on stuff. So like layering your descriptions. So
yes,
if you just keep repeating it, though sometimes it feels a bit repetitive, it can really emphasize like, oh, okay, that's important because they've said it several times and their characters would pick it up. And then whenever they make like perception checks or stuff, you can layer on there, or journey events. So flavoring. There's in the Mirkwood region, Mirkwood campaign guide. There's like set journey events for in Mirkwood, and I think it gives you suggestions for different areas potentially.
Okay.
So that's quite a good way of like flavoring those events to be worse or better depending on which region you're in.
That's interesting. And so in terms of kind of making those events or that kind of journey feel different or feel significant from a mechanical point of view, are there particular rules or things that would I'd need to know would come into play through the journey through Mirkwood?
That's a good question. I often called for like survival checks or like or stuff along those lines to stop like if people were getting lost for that. They it lays out what happens if you like have a bout of madness in Mirkwood. Then it might mean that you do that differently.
Okay.
There's a section here traveling in Mirkwood. It's across either severe or daunting terrain, with the exception of the western ease where the woodmen dwell.
Okay.
While travel in the forest may be difficult, those who dwell in the forest may know local routes. So yeah, sometimes you need to like think, actually, is it even possible for them to make this journey without some sort of help or guide? And yeah, I don't think I have a specific rules. I kind of guess you just use the rules that are at your disposal in the Lore Master's Guide. So, corruption saving throws for various things in the forest, treating them as tainted lands. So there's, you're going to have certain things that you're going to see which are more difficult. And, how are they traveling? So asking them, like, are you stealthing? Are you traveling at normal speed? And then using that to, because there's a lot of things potentially that might be watching, but I don't think I have any specific mechanics. Do you have any mechanics that you think that might work?
Well, there are specific journey events tied to Mirkwood, aren't there?
Yeah.
Like the table. This is something that's always been behind the curtain for me, so I've never seen what the tables have on them. But I presume there's a custom set for Mirkwood compared to, I don't know, the Vales of Anduin.
I think there is.
I know that you then actually add in kind of your own, and there are some kind of slightly more generic ones that you can flavor, but there are some, because I remember there were particular ones where we came across some strange statues, which were of ancient times, and they were, the way you described them, they were very creepy, but it was unclear whether they were creepy in an evil way or whether or not they were whether they were creepy in a kind of mysterious way.
Yeah, and I love that about the elves and Lord of the Rings. Like so we were so suspicious of elven things that I guess it's magic and it's strange and strange. The assumption that people make often is that strange equals bad. And I really like that often Tolkien is saying like, no, like if it's different, if it's strange, it's a different culture, like that's just unusual. And like walking up, Strider is strange and he's like possibly one of the most heroic characters in the whole thing. And initially, it's different. And it's a nice theme, isn't it? That it's viewing other things as, although initially you kind of push past that. So yeah, there's a specific journey event table which is on page 133 of one of the books, which is called the Mirkwood campaign book, which is sort of more like a over the years sort of suggested ideas of things that happen, and it's useful inspiration. So I tend to use that when you're in Mirkwood.
A rule that you could enforce. Now we do this. We've been stricter and more relaxed about it depending where we are, but things like rations, because the scale of Mirkwood is so large, and in advance how long you can predict how long it would take in terms of days and weeks to travel across. We've always been quite good at trying to be prepared and making sure we've got rations, knowing that if we run out, we'll need to hunt in the forest, that's potentially very difficult. So a rule that you could, whether you enforce it all the time for journeys, I think it probably is worth enforcing for a journey across Mirkwood is, do you have enough rations? And that way getting lost has a mechanical impact. Like if you get lost and it adds on days of travel, maybe you need to seek out food or water because you can't just go on indefinitely stumbling around in the forest.
One thing I struggle with rations, and I think it is like an enjoyable thing. I think people enjoy thinking about like how we're going to survive this, but I kind of want to like abstract it out. Maybe that's inspiration for me to go and write that up. But say you start with a set number and then you roll checks, or like every time there's an event, a dice happens and it goes down by a certain amount. Because what the difficulty is, it's like as a player, I'm like, well, we're going on a long journey, so I'll just take 6 months worth of rations. But like that's not realistic. Like that would you could carry that much food. So how do we is there a limit somewhere? I don't know if there is in the rules about how many rations you can carry, and then it becomes like quite complicated. Like, what's your carrying capacity?
Yeah.
How many rations you're taking? Does it actually last that long? How much can you forage? And then I'm like, oh, this is too complicated. I can't be bothered. Whereas if there's just some way of like, there's like every time an event happens or something, you fail a check, then it goes down by 1, and then if you get to below a certain amount, then it gives you a mechanical disadvantage.
Mm.
If you've written those rules, email us or tweet us, because I would love them.
I mean, it is. I think that does sound really interesting from the point of view of adding pressure to a journey. That if you've got a sense of, if the journey is going to take, I don't know how long a journey across Mirkwood takes.
Well, the Old Forest Road's like 200 to 300 miles long or something. It's not. So 200 miles at normal pace would be
20 miles a day.
2 weeks. If you were not,
if you're on a road which is like straight and well maintained, like traveling through Mirkwood is onerous, is difficult. You don't have a set path. You're getting lost, low levels. There's ravines, there's rivers that you have to navigate and get around. So getting anywhere is really slow.
So, but I like the idea that you have got a certain budget to get through it in terms of your rations and things, and that adds an element of peril, because every time you get waylaid or you come across something which means you've got to double back, that's adding on the pressure, and that pressure will come out towards the end of the journey. I was wondering a little bit, because you mentioned very clearly at the start about the danger of getting lost in Mirkwood. If you get lost, there's no way you're getting back. I was just wondering how you would play that from a mechanical point of view, because I suppose I like the idea of having that sense of danger, having that sense of peril, and I want players to be making meaningful checks or rolls to make sure that they're not getting lost. But I also don't want them to die lost in the forest.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that by making there a pitfall to potentially getting lost without it being absolutely catastrophic?
There's a song in Frozen 2 which is called "Lost in the Woods," and it's like an 80s ballad, and it's hilarious. I can't help but think about that now. Josh knows what I mean.
I do. Great film. Lost in the Woods. I first of all, I totally agree. Dying, as in actually the game stopping because they got lost in the woods, in this kind of a game, a sort of heroic fantasy game, would not be fun. As you know, I absolutely love, like, my real passion is running horror RPGs. Getting lost in the woods and dying is a great conclusion to a horror RPG. It would not be a great conclusion to this. So you're right. There does need to be.
I would love that in another setting, Josh. Please invite me when you're playing that game. But it's not very.
No. I suppose the way you could do it from a rules perspective is that they would just utterly fail in their objective. So they might be able to get back out the forest the way they came in, but they had lost all their time, resources, and they had not even come close to achieving whatever presumably reasonably good, moral, heroic thing they were off to do was. Effectively, they have just gone in a big circle and achieved nothing. I suppose that's probably a way of emphasizing it being a big defeat without them actually starving to death in woods, which is not really the kind of game that we're playing.
Yeah. And also, I think by heightening the tension and the difficulty of it, it leads players to then seek out ways to try and succeed. So if you're like, this is going to be really difficult, and then they're like, okay, well, maybe we'll go and speak to Radagast and we'll get some sort of blessing or help, or ask the animals to guide us. Maybe we'll go to the woodmen and see if anybody's willing to guide us. Maybe we'll go to the elves and see if they can assist us. Maybe we'll speak to the dwarves and like the old dwarven, the old forest road. Like maybe we'll get involved in setting that up because we want to make travel better. Maybe we'll make friends with some spiders.
Yes, maybe. The resource thing is a good way of, I think, having a meaningful consequence, because if the players know they're running low on food, so you keep that conversation going of like, it's been this many days, are you going to hunt, or you're down on your rations, you are not the one forcing them to turn back. They likely will make the decision themselves to turn back when it seems, all is lost, it's hopeless, we cannot reach the other side, or we can't reach that destination in the forest, we're going to turn back. I suppose if the players just foolhardily decide, no, we will press on, then perhaps they could die and get lost in the woods. I think it's very unlikely a party would actually press on.
I'm just wondering, actually, maybe if you like run out of food and then you roll another journey event for them or something. That could be a way to abstract it out, and because essentially giving them the chance to get the hunting event and get some more food. Yeah, so I think there's probably an opportunity. Maybe when the Lord of the Rings role-playing game, come to do a region guide for this area, maybe they'll give us some concrete rules for it. That'd be quite cool. Or potentially there are concrete rules in the books that I've forgotten about. If so, because actually, I do that.
Just a flash of inspiration. Another thing I've seen done for if you're about to have a TPK and actually you think, oh, I really didn't intend for the whole party to die at this moment, a fun way you can give the players agency to rescue themselves is you effectively like cut away from the moment and give them another party. So it could be like, we're hopelessly lost without food, fade to black, and then you get them to run a mini arc with some other characters who are, we need to rescue the party in the woods, and you get to guide them to rescue the party, and that way the other party's still defeated, but the players get to have the fun of rescuing them rather than it being spoiled. So I think there are ways to do it, and I think getting lost has to be, because it's such a big part of the books, it has to be an option, has to be a risk for the players. The other big risk is the monsters that live in.
I feel like those are both good segues.
That was going to be my next question. So we've talked about the hazards of the terrain. What options do I have for setting up an encounter?
I mean, it's going to be spiders. I'm just going to say it's going to be spiders. There are a lot of spiders.
No, I would never put spiders out. I know you don't like them, so I just take them out again.
Oh, so it could be spiders, and there's a lot of spiders. And I remember from the movies that there's a lot of spiders everywhere. Does it have to be spiders? Can it be something else?
I think, and also, does it have to be the same spiders? Like, what kind of range of spiders? Smorgasbord of spiders.
The spiders have factions.
Spiders have factions. It's politics. I think there's worth. I guess there's like NPCs and enemies and factions within the forest, and you can sort of split those up. And then there's also like locations, specific places, and then they have specific enemies there. But just talking about the range of enemies, I guess like spiders is a big part, and I think universally misunderstood species. Like I don't hate spiders, but I know some people find them quite scary, amazing creatures, but quite creepy, particularly when they're giant. I can understand that, and I guess the lore aspect is that there's like Mongolians, like the original, like number one big spider, sort of where did she come from? Part of the world, really, really interesting thoughts about that. And then Shelob is a sort of, progeny of Ungoliant, and then all the spiders, the giant spiders, are from Shelob. And so there's these large spiders, and I think what the game does really well is think like, well, there's one sort of the Shelob, so there may well be other, there'll be some spiders that are bigger than other spiders, and maybe those spiders have names, and maybe they have characters, and maybe they have really powerful abilities, and those are like really cool adversaries.
Okay.
Like spiders are smart, and Shelob can speak, so why can't these spiders speak? And I love like them, and I think as players I've sort of like, and I wouldn't say their names or like exactly what they do, but dropping in that and like, maybe hinting that the spiders have a little bit of autonomy. In the book they talk about like there being a parliament of spiders as the area where the spiders meet, and maybe there's sort of factional divides in those. And I had quite a lot of fun. The book gives you some things for like attercops, which I think is what they call them in The Hobbit, is it? And it gives you profiles for that. But I went into 5th edition and found lots of different spider profiles and popped them in to have like a range of spider enemies. And there's also profiles for some of the named giant spiders, which they create for Adventures of Middle Earth. And they are really interesting. I don't know how you felt fighting them, Josh. I think you fought 2 of them.
Yeah. They were really well done. First of all, I actually think I agree with everything you've had to say about spiders. I am irrationally afraid of them. They actually are fascinating creatures. And I think as monsters in any role-playing games, they're great. I think they are normally done mechanically really well because they're not just a big sack of hit points. Actually, they normally have some quite interesting abilities. They normally have quite interesting movement abilities with web. They can affect the battlefield in quite an unusual way. Often they have some kind of poison or fear or paralyzing ability. And I think generally spiders are well done in role-playing games, that they're quite an interactive enemy in a way that some other kind of
things can just be a big bag of hit points. Yeah, that's the worst sort of enemies.
So I think that's one thing that was really memorable about fighting them, particularly in the woods, because the woods had a particular terrain, and it normally was dark and it was quite scary, and there was fear mechanics and there was webs. So often one of us would end up getting stuck in a web, which slightly changes which is what happens obviously in the book, and Bilbo ends up needing to try and rescue them from in the webs. So I think there's a lot to play with mechanically with the spiders, and I liked that we got these rumors that there were these big, old, ancient, intelligent spiders there was like more of an agenda. They weren't just these kind of faceless monsters. Like they were this malignant presence in the forest, and it always underlined that sense of like, we kind of shouldn't be here, which I think is what you want. It constantly should feel like you wake up every morning like, why are we here? Why have we come into the forest?
So say I've got someone in my party who's got, like Josh, is skittish around spiders, and I'm thinking, well, the last 3 sessions I've thrown giant spiders at them, and it's getting to this point where if I don't throw a different enemy into the mix, they're going to leave. So what other options do I have?
So in the books they talk about forest goblins, and they slightly amend them from other goblins, and I think they're quite nice in terms of like, they're sort of hunted by the spiders, so it's not like they're working together in any means. There's not really stuff about goblins riding spiders, which is quite like a fantasy trope, isn't it? Like maybe you could do that if you want, but the forest goblins, they use like poisonous venomous weapons, and they are quite sneaky, and they might live potentially in parts of the forest which are darker, but probably not particularly like organized or formidable, like quite a low level enemy. Certainly to the south, there's like, at the time period where AIM is set, which is just after the Battle of Five Armies, Dol Guldur is kind of abandoned. There's not much down there, but maybe there's some sort of remnants of more organized orcish forces.
Okay.
Some other things. So there's the mountains of Mirkwood, which is on Tolkien's map. And I think that's really interesting what's in those mountains. That I think the elves potentially had a refuge there. I'm not sure if that's just an AIM thing or that's a lore thing, but like they had retreated there after Amon Lak turned into Dol Guldur.
I think that it is a lore thing.
It is a lore thing. So there's maybe elven ruins there, but I think mountains and cave systems are something that features strongly in Tolkien as areas where you're likely to find evil things. And I can't say because of spoilers, there's some stuff in the book that is around there and they write about, and there's some really interesting enemies that you could pop in there from the lore. Really put anything there because we don't know, so higher level enemies. And then I think the other thing is like spirits, so the forest, there's been a lot of death. There's a lot of been creatures that have been there, potentially ancient men, ancient elves, burial. So there's these things called like wood wights and are creatures that are like kind of spirits, almost like the barrow wights. And then finally, I think the trees themselves. So, we know that some trees come to life. They should be sleeping, but they're waking. So that could be another potential enemy. And I not really particularly used that, but I think that is a really interesting idea for a forest. I think that's the main. Oh, and one other thing actually, and Josh, remember this, is that I had this like fungal troll, which was based off a
Yes.
expedition thing, which is actually really terrifying for everybody. It was quite a high level encounter, but I think there's going to be trolls and creatures. So anything that's like any part of the legendarium about different creatures, and then sort of taking a foresty slant on it.
Yeah, reflavoring them with, because just adding in or removing an ability or two to an existing enemy, particularly one they've already fought, can immediately give a sense of it being a different place. And like that fungal troll, because it had like, I think we actually got poisoned or we got diseased as a result of fighting it. And when you were talking about fighting it, you did a good job of sort of narrating the weird color of its skin and some of these toxins kind of getting on us and stuff. And we felt while we were fighting it like, oh, this could be bad. Like we maybe shouldn't be interacting with this.
Yeah, I think like sometimes when I'm running games, because of my job and I have quite a good understanding of like bacteria infections, whenever that sort of stuff comes up, I get like really vivid on the descriptions.
And I love it. It's great.
Face, like they're like, oh god,
this is absolutely disgusting. The other type of enemy, although not necessarily an enemy, but can be an opponent, is these are all obviously monsters, but there are factions in the forest, and even elves. Although we think of elves in Tolkien's work as good, we know from the experience of characters in the forest that the elves are very protective of their lands. And even though they are not evil, they might end up being your enemy if you're stray into their territory. They may not kill you, but they might take you prisoner or drive you off the land or lead you to get lost or something like that. So that's always an option as a foe in the forest in a kind of different way.
I guess when you're an immortal being, they are quite mischievous, the elves, and I think there's a differentiation between the sort of like high elves in Noldor that are mainly in Rivendell and stuff, and is it the Teleri, the sort of elves that never went west?
The Avari are the ones who never went.
That's it.
But, are the Teleri the ones who started and got lost? You're talking about there's the Sylvan elves, and then there's it's the Twilight. The grey elves.
Yeah. We should do a whole episode about the elves later on down the line. But it's not. I think it's not the same elves, and it is very much within the realms of possibility that they will, through their own warped sense of right and wrong, do something that could be quite catastrophic for your player characters, which can be quite fun. And I think it also creates a dilemma, because I think as a player, we can't really like just kill you can't just fight them. You don't really kill an elf. Like, that's happened, and like there's been things where elves have killed elves, like the Kinstrife, and or like elves and dwarf, and like that is like something that comes up in Tolkien, but it's always like this very evil thing. And I'm pretty sure like you definitely get shadow points, even if that elf was directly acting against you. If you just resorted to violence, and then it leads to like a different sort of encounter where you kind of like, do you use non-lethal force and try and overpower them, or do you try and use your like charisma and get out of it that way? Or
interesting.
Yeah.
I've got one last encounter-related question. So, say I'm playing this, kind of doing a journey, and I roll the dreaded 12 on the encounters table, which is fly, you fools. What? If you rolled fly, you fools, on the journey event table, what would you put in there? What would you have them facing? What would be your? I know you don't want to spoil all of it, so give us a hint about what would be a good terrifying enemy.
Enemy. Well, because 12 can be either good or bad depending on other rules.
Yeah, I thought it might be fun to do the bad one.
You want to do the bad one first?
Well,
I think in the books they talk about like the ring wraiths, so we talked about them before. What were they out doing? They're not corporeal, but they're definitely around. So there's certain ring wraiths in the forest, and there's profiles for different ring wraiths in the books. So I've certainly employed them before. Other things are like Child of Shelob, so these sort of larger spiders can be really interesting. And then there's some enemies that lurk in the mountains of Mirkwood, which could potentially come out. Or just enemies that you know around. So like there was this werewolf figure that they encountered before, and that's become a recurring enemy. It was like, very early on in the sessions, they fought a werewolf at the Moor Ford that got washed away in the river. And then more recently, they've encountered that in Mirkwood. And so, like, actually, if you've got a villain that's, want to come back and employ, put them in on that 12. Use it as an opportunity to explore what's happening.
There's another option, and we talked to this previously, I think, when we talked about creating monsters and Balrogs and Goliant, that there are kind of like unnamed horrors in Tolkien. They don't often appear in the plot, but they exist in the world, the sense of kind of like primordial, nameless, in the dark places of the world. And Mirkwood is one of those like places that you could come across something that maybe even as the lore master you didn't need to name, you wouldn't even need to define that much. It would be a plausible place for the players to encounter something.
I've just remembered something. So we need to talk about this more, because obviously there's Adventures in Middle-earth and then there's Lord of the Rings role-playing by Free League, and I recently read it. I've not owned it yet, but I read through a copy of it, and I think my favorite thing in the book, there was this table for nameless things, and it was just a table you roll on, and it was just like you roll the thing, and it was like the slimy, watcher. And that's one like, but it'd be like a verb, a noun, and thing, and you combine it together, and then you get this name of a thing. Like the Watcher and the Watcher. We all know what it is. But like, it's just like so evocative, the names. So, to be able to just float off the fly, it's very Lovecraftian, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
The horror aspect of it. You couldn't overuse something like that, but I think it when used well, it could really add a sort of horror unknowable bit.
There are enough hints of it in Tolkien's world around the edges that it wouldn't take you out of the setting to introduce something like that in the forest. It wouldn't be like, well, hang on a second, you've totally spoiled my immersion here. That does exist.
And I think there are things that would take you out of the immersion. Like there's certain like D&D enemies, and I think that's like setting specific. We're coming away from Mirkwood a little bit, but like, if you're gonna put an enemy in here that isn't specifically talked about in Tolkien, which I think is interesting to do, because like he didn't write like a catalogue of it. He wasn't interested in saying like these are all the enemies you might meet. No. That's not how he was telling the story. If it wasn't important to the story, it doesn't come up. It has to really. It's quite hard to fit things in, and there's certain things that might just stick out like a sore thumb. I guess one last thing to just say, like, it's nice to, when you're planning an adventure, is like, where are they going? And the book really nicely lays out like specific locations of interest. And I haven't used all of them, but there's a lot that are like, oh, that just makes sense that that's there. So I'm going to like latch onto that, and like that can be a destination or something's happening there. And then your larger NPCs can say like, oh, go to this thing. So obviously there's like the things that we know from The Hobbit, like the Elven King's Halls, the Elf Path, the mountains, the Old Forest Road, there's Dol Guldur, there's the Woodman settlements. But then, I guess some of the things that they come out, so there's like other fortresses, like other things connected to the Dol Guldur, smaller ones, ruins, particular trees, spider lairs, ruins, old burial grounds. Or like, there's the Old Forest Road. So that's a dwarven ruin. The dwarves wouldn't just have a road with no, they're clever, like towers along the way. So like what dwarven ruins are associated with that.
Interesting.
I like that. And the Ravanian region guide's got so many of these little things dotted all over the map. There's loads of great inspiration. And you don't need to use all of them, but I quite like them.
Well, that sounds absolutely great. And I think that, thank you both. I feel like I've got lots of really good ideas for adventures that we could potentially have in Mirkwood. Spoiler alert, they will contain hundreds of spiders.
Damn it! I was going to say you wouldn't necessarily need to have spiders. You could have a nameless thing and an elf, and you no spiders. No, they need spiders. I think they need at least the hints of spiders for it to work.
No emails except on party business. And comment suggestions and questions to thefellowshipphase@gmail.com. The long year turns to its close. Much we have accomplished these last seasons.
On the next episode
Our
of
fellowship
The
disbands,
Fellowship Phase.
but is not broken, and we will return